Megan, thanks for your time today. Before we start with the questions and this conversation, could you give us a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, I've been in immigration. My name is Meagan Kirchner. I run Kirchner Law. I've been in immigration for over 12 years now, exclusively in business immigration. Have specialized in, EB5, NIW, EB1, H2. Spent a lot of years in big law doing high volume L1, H1B, TN, really your alphabet soup of non-immigrant visas. So well versed in the changes we've had in the last decade and kind of the riding the wave of different administrations. So here we are again, and we'll kind of navigate it as we go.
Could you explain to us in simple terms what is an H-1B visa and how it's worked for the US employers who want to hire foreign workers?
Right. As it stands today, the H-1B is a capped non-immigrant visa program for professional occupations, specialty occupations. And what that means is basically that there's going to be a particular degree required for the position, at least requiring a bachelor's degree. There's also a separate master's cap that, kind of gets into kind of more nuance there, but, it's initially granted for 3 years, extendable up to 6. There's some benefits with H-1B that it's dual intent. So a lot of employers and employees like it for that reason. So if they're concurrently pursuing, say, the green card process, it's not a situation where they have to be cautious about filing timelines and how they're handling their non-immigrant status during that time. It can be a concurrent process. So for employers today, the most common way to get H-1B is through the lottery because of that cap I talked about. Because of the numerical limits, it's currently administered in March every year. And then workers or employers selected in the cap will then be able to file the H-1B visa. There's also a separate avenue for H-1B that'll for cap exempt employers. Really, that's going to be your higher education and nonprofit and government research institutions. So it's very common. The top industries are going to be, your IT positions, engineering, accounting, life sciences like chemistry, and again, education. So it's very widely used and impacts anyone from a startup who needs an engineer or an IT professional, all the way up to your big top 4 accounting firms, audio manufacturers. It really touches so many areas of professional services.
For the last couple of days, everybody is talking about this. We hear that the filing fees for the H1 program have recently increased significantly, in some cases up to $100,000. Could you clarify what this change actually means, which kind of companies it's affected, and why?
Right. So it doesn't change the base I-129 filing fees. Those are going to be business as usual. But what it does do, we'll kind of take it back a step because what it does do has changed many times in the past, 6 days now. Starting September 19th, there was an executive order that noted H-1Bs were now going to be subject to a $100,000 fee. No further details on if it was all certain industries, how it's going to be paid. It was just panic-inducing Friday news that we kind of all the attorneys and employers and employees were navigating and trying to figure out what that meant and how to strategize for the future over the weekend. Less than 48 hours later, they clarified it to note that it's not going to be applicable to all H-1Bs. That's really targeting new H-1Bs, which would impact the 2026 fiscal year lottery in March. And then, still it was outstanding. We didn't know whether it was going to be every application, one-time fee, what it was going to be. So there was frequently asked questions issued from DHS and Department of State to clarify and kind of try and unmuddy the waters so we could all know what we were in for. What they ultimately, sorry, I'm referring to notes. It's changed so many times. I don't want to misspeak. They noted it doesn't apply, again, like I said, to all applications. Those with currently approved petitions or those with valid H-1B visas weren't going to be subject. Initial panic on Friday, attorneys were telling H-1Bs that maybe been abroad with approved valid visas, like, hey, get back before midnight on the 21st. We don't want you to be subject to a $100,000 fee, right? So everybody's panicking, everybody's trying to get back. And we find out that, hey, if they've got a valid visa, they're not going to be subject upon reentry. They don't have to rush home. That's not something where they need to drop what they're doing to come back. It's also been further clarified that it's a one-time fee, not a recurring fee, and does not apply for renewals and extensions, which is going to cover quite a few H-1B holders. So what we've ultimately learned over multiple announcements from the government and, talking to news outlets is that it's much more narrow than initially thought, still extremely concerning. But, a lot of the people that are already on H-1B can kind of take at least a momentary breath of relief right now as it stands. So one additional possible update, it came from a White House spokesperson, hasn't been any written guidance on it. There's possibility that physicians may be exempt. There's also a broad reference to possible national insurance waivers. We just don't know how that's going to be applied, whether it's going to be the standards, what's going to rise to the level of a national interest, how that's going to work. We also don't know how we're going to pay it, how the PPP is going to be paid. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. It's a very fluid situation. So it's nonetheless concerning for everybody who is looking at an H-1B or on an H-1B. It's central to so many different industries and companies. So that's really where all we know right now is that they've kind of step by step narrowed it a little bit every day, but it's still very broad as it stands and concerning for the upcoming lottery.
For us, building a strong network is essential, which is why we were pleased to be in a partnership with Kirchner Law, especially given the value experience you bring to our clients. Based in your years of expertise, how do these fees increase impact small and medium-sized business compared to large corporations that traditionally use the H-1 program?
So it's going to definitely hit small and mid-sized businesses harder than the large corporations. But regardless of how large they are, it's such a significant fee increase that even for your large companies, it's going to really make them choose carefully which workers they're going to put on H-1B, because they're not going to spend $100,000 on a level 1 analyst or engineer. It's just not going to be worth it for them. So it's going to absolutely make it to where small businesses, startups are going to have a really hard time filling entry-level positions, because regardless of what the government says, I know that their goal is to, have new jobs available for U.S. grads that are in these kind of high-skill positions. But there's still going to be a gap. This may not be the best mechanism for trying to have their ultimate end goal, and it's certainly going to be detrimental to the economy and small and mid-sized businesses. And that actually brings up a good point. I didn't touch on it just based on the $100,000 filing fee, but there's also proposals to change the lottery system. Rather than being a true lottery, they're looking at making it a weighted lottery, giving preference to higher wage positions, which is also going to, even if we didn't have this $100,000 fee, that separate proposal would directly impact small and mid-sized businesses, because they're not going to be able to compete with the wages you can offer from your Fortune 500 companies. They can raise their wages if they want to. It's going to be extremely difficult for small startups and new businesses, mid-sized businesses, universities to pay the wages to kind of be in this kind of preferred position.
For companies that find the H-1B process too expensive or competitive, what other visa option or legal alternatives exist to hire international talent?
It's definitely a narrow pool of options for a lot of these positions, because the alternative non-immigrant visa positions have additional stipulations or eligibility requirements that are going to be difficult to meet for a large pool of traditional H-1B workers. There's O1, which is really limited to those that have risen to the top of their field. It's kind of been liberally applied for in prior years, but it's definitely more stringent in the past 3, 4, 5 years. So it's going to be difficult for an early career professional to qualify for that kind of visa. It definitely will be an alternative for some that would normally apply for an H-1B, but not all. Similarly, there's L1 visas, but that's going to make it to where those employees or prospective H-1B holders, they can't just go straight to a U.S. from college to a U.S. position. That requires both the position to qualify as well as the company means they need to have a multinational office. There needs to be more, an office outside of the U.S. that the worker has worked for first for a year. So that's, again, may help some workers. It's going to be a very small subset. You've got TN visas that are possible, but again, limited to country. There's a few other country-specific visa alternatives you can look at that are going to be limited to certain occupations. So there's not another equivalent broad-based skilled non-immigrant visa that they can slot into. I mean, possibly, there's some H-1B positions that may be high volume for certain seasons that could slot into like one of the seasonal visas, but that's going to be really limited and very fact specific. There's just not a really broad option. They can look at pathways to green cards. That's going to be extremely limiting for workers from certain countries, and there's no intermediate status they get. So they're not going to get current work authorization. That's going to be a long game solution, as if they, pursue like a green card, like an EB-2 or something like that, through the traditional perm process. That's an option to get them a work permit eventually, but it's not fast. A lot of categories are backlogged. So, and it doesn't help the employee or the U.S. employers in the intermediary period while you're waiting in line for that process. So it's really a pretty grim option, pool of options available outside of H-1B for this kind of the traditional use case.
What will be your recommendation or advice to companies seeking to hire foreign talent with the H-1 visa, and to the candidates looking for alternative ways to work in the state in this moment?
So at this point, I understand the knee-jerk reaction to panic, and that really was what everybody across industries, attorneys, employers, employees alike, it was panic-inducing initially. As they've kind of walked it back over the past few days, it really gives you some, not sense of relief in the sense that everything's going to be okay necessarily, but there's hope that they're kind of understanding as they navigate how they're going to implement this, that maybe, the true pathway is going to be a little more balanced. So there's a lot of talk about litigation. That's absolutely going to be broad litigation about this, and that could, put a stay on whether or not this is implemented while that's kind of navigating the legal process. So it'll be some time before we actually see how this is going to play out in full. So it's really going to be something that we just have to look at other options that are available. I didn't mention it. It's possible some of these early career professionals may have qualify for OPT or a J1, something like that, to kind of fill the gap while we're waiting to see how the H-1B pans out. But I wouldn't necessarily give up hope on the H-1B at this point. If it's something you want to look at, keep talking to employers, but take that with a grain of salt that we don't know how it's actually going to play out. Try and come up with an alternative plan if you can, whether that's in the U.S. or elsewhere. Don't put all your eggs in the H-1B basket. That's the top advice, but also stay informed, see what's changing, because it is a very fluid situation right now.
Meagan, thank you very much for taking the time to answer our questions about the recently H-1B changes and the fees increase. PSC, Work Support Solution, is proud to have her as a partner. If your company is looking to apply for an H-1B visa to hire foreign talent, is essentially to have the right professional. That is why we recommend Kirchner Law. You can contact her through the website on the screen now. Meagan, thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me.